BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Friday, another Cooper Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? Okay, today is not really Friday, it's Saturday. This episode is coming out on a Saturday, so I apologize for the delay in the Cooper Friday episode, but I'm hoping that next week everything will return to its normal schedule. In this episode, I'm going to be discussing the 1980 money find at Tena Bar in Washington State that is connected to the D.B. Cooper case, looking at the newest videos on the D.B. Cooper Sleuth channel, and responding to an interview that was done with Darren Schaefer on the Bright Brains podcast. Darren Schaefer is, of course, the host of the Cooper Vortex, and I am your host, Black Box Ned. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about D.B. Cooper. But with this episode, I'm really hoping that people will leave their comments until they've listened to the entirety of it, because I'm going to be walking you guys through my thought processes and my mental gymnastics over the years, and the things that I've been thinking about in regards to the D.B. Cooper case. And as you're going to see very early on, I've had lots of reversals. I used to think something in the past, and now I no longer have that idea. So let's see how things go. Firstly, D.B. Cooper is the man responsible for the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. aviation history. He boarded a plane on November 24th of 1971 in Portland, Oregon that was flying towards Seattle, Washington. He hijacked the plane, giving a note to a flight attendant saying that he had a bomb in his briefcase, and he opened the briefcase and showed what appeared to have been a bomb in a convincing fashion, and the passengers of the plane didn't even know that they were being skyjacked. However, the plane lands in Washington after an extended 2-hour delay in the air, and then D.B. Cooper got his ransom demands met. He demanded $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. And then at some point, D.B. Cooper would later go on to parachute into the night. He jumped into the night and was never seen or heard from again, to everybody's satisfaction. Of course, there are people out there who believe that they have solved the case and that they've interacted with D.B. Cooper and that they've identified this individual, who was actually using the name Dan Cooper, but due to media mislabeling, he has since become known as D.B. Cooper. And yes, there are a bunch of steps that happened that lead to the name D.B. Cooper being used, and perhaps I'm going to have to do a much larger presentation on that for Cooper Friday in the near future. And if there are any ideas for future episodes, or if there's something that you want covered for this segment, you can drop your idea in the comments section. If there's something that you want discussed about D.B. Cooper here on Black Box Online Radio, I'm always open to listener suggestions, and for larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. Okay, so we've talked about November 24th of 1971. What happens next? Well, D.B. Cooper jumps into the night with $200,000, and then we don't really see any of the money showing up in circulation again, because they recorded all of the serial numbers. The money was in $20 bills, and the only money that has been recovered from the D.B. Cooper heist was found in 1980 in Washington State at a place called Tena Bar. And there's a fascinating video that was made by Bruce Smith, the mayor of Cooperville, as some people call him, but it's made on his personal YouTube channel. And Bruce Smith is, of course, the author of D.B. Cooper and the FBI, and he talks about the money find at Tena Bar, that when this money was discovered, it was found buried in the sand, but of course there were shards and fragments of the bills that were found along the sand at Tena Bar, and there were 3 bundles of bills that totaled $5,800. Again, these are in $20 bills. And I remembered a very particular detail that Bruce Smith shared about the money find, and that is that the 3 stacks of bills were placed on top of each other. When they were discovered, they were not completely in line, though. It's almost as if one stack of bills was pointing one way and another was slightly pointing in a different way. Think of a 3-layer cake, and the layers might not be completely perfectly in line. There might be one's off to the side this way and another's off to the side that way. This is very bizarre stuff. And I told you guys that I would be discussing the Bright Brains interview with Darren Schaefer, the host of the Cooper Vortex, and he brought up something that I thought was just absolutely important to share. And it's something that he has said before on his show. But during the Bright Brains interview, he said a lot of DB Cooper sleuths wish that the money had not been found at Tena Bar because it brought more questions than answers. It brought absolutely no answers. It makes no sense about how the money should have ended there, how the money should have ended up at Tena Bar. There is no reasonable explanation for this, but let's go through some possibilities. And to help us out, I'm going to go over to citizensleuths.com, the hunt for DB Cooper, and they have a whole page on the Tena Bar money find. And you will see the name Tena Bar written out in two different ways. Tina can be spelled T-E-N-A or T-I-N-A. It's very frequently written T-I-N-A, but I learned early on that it's actually written T-E-N-A. And what Bruce Smith shared in his video was that when people hear the name Tena Bar, you might do a little bit of reading and see that, oh, Tena Bar is a sandbar. But what Bruce Smith said is it's actually not even geographically or topographically similar to a sandbar. It is more like just a beach. That's why that the family was on there in 1980. But it says fact. 3 bundles of $20 bills were found just below the surface of the sand at Tena Bar in 1980. Fact. The bundles were identified as DB Cooper's money because the FBI had recorded the serial numbers and they matched the bills. Fact. The sand was dredged from the Columbia River and dumped on Tena Bar in 1974, and the money was found in 1980. This is all happening after DB Cooper's heist in 1971. The FBI transcript states that the sand dredgings were pushed 50 yards up and down the beach. The interpretation is, if the money was substantially more than 50 yards from the dredging sands, it could not have been dredged from the river. And to the credit of Ryan Burns, he has talked about how dredging the sands, like any type of use of some type of technological innovation to dredge the sands from the bottom of the Columbia River, would most likely have damaged the bills in a way where they wouldn't have ended up in 3 stacks placed on top of each other, even if they're not perfectly in line, even if they aren't perfectly bonded together. They would have been most likely pushed around. They most likely would have been spread apart in some way, so that seems a little bit unlikely. But let's hear the full story. In 1980, a 9-year-old named Brian Ingram was with his family along the Columbia River on a beach called Tena Bar. To the credit of Bruce Smith, he said it's more like a beach than a sandbar. While scooping out the sand for a fire pit, he uncovered 3 bundles of decomposed cash. The $5,800 and $20 bills still had intact rubber bands and was identified by their serial numbers as part of DB Cooper's original $200,000 in ransom money. The FBI brought in a team of agents to comb the beach to look for the rest of the cash, but only small fragments were found. During that time, an associate professor of geology at Portland State University named Dr. Leonard Palmer was brought in to determine the circumstances surrounding the burial of the money, which resulted in the Palmer Report. The exact position of the money find was recorded in the FBI archive in 1974, or it's recorded in the FBI archive, In 1974, a dredging operation dumped tons of sands at Tena Bar. Dr. Palmer discovered a clay layer in the sand that figured heavily into this report. These factors all influenced the interpretation of the money find. In order to better understand the money found at Tena Bar, these factors needed to be re-examined. Methods. Tena Bar was visited by the Cooper research team in March of 2009. The beach was continuously photographed along with its entire length for reference. A planned identification of surviving trees from 1980 could not be accomplished due to several feet of severe erosion. Okay, so let's look at the major possibilities. This is why I said the Tena Bar money find makes no sense. This is why Darren Schaefer said that the Tena Bar money find makes no sense because, firstly, these bills were examined, of course, by the FBI and the authorities. And one thing that Bruce Smith shared in his video is that when you look at the Tena Bar money, you'll see some bills that have sides that are completely black. Not just discoloration, but they're completely black. And I had thought in the past that that was just done because of natural elements, because money has ink on it. But according to Bruce Smith, that was done by the forensic teams, and the money did not look like that when it was discovered. So that's just one thing I wanted to share. But the next point is that they analyzed diatoms on the bills. And if I misstate anything, I want people to correct me in the comments section down below. If I get anything wrong, please share what you think the truth is, because, I mean, this is some complicated stuff. And as you guys know, I'm not the biggest Cooper expert in the world. I'm somewhat of a newcomer to this case. And it was my understanding that these diatoms were analyzed, and there are two specific features about the diatoms that could reveal something about D.B. Cooper's jump. Number one, they came from the Lewis River, not the Columbia River, and number two, they were spring diatoms. They're microscopic particles that were found during the springtime. And D.B. Cooper, of course, jumped in November of 1971. So that would, of course, be the late fall. I mean, not quite winter yet, but it's the late autumn. So how on earth does this make any sense? And their problem is that the Lewis River feeds into the Columbia River, or let's look at it in a different way. There is an intersection between the Lewis River and the Columbia River, but it is upstream or from the Tena Bar location. So the money should not have had any reasonable way of floating to the Columbia River location at Tena Bar. I mean, if it landed in the Lewis River, or if he was in the Lewis River, if Cooper lost the money in the air, then it should not have gone into the Lewis River and ended up in the Columbia River at Tena Bar. That just is going against the currents. It's also going to a downstream location. I mean, if the intersection between the Lewis River and the Columbia River were in the exact opposite places, I wouldn't be talking about it at all. I would just say, all right, well, it seems like that's what happened. That D.B. Cooper jumped into the Lewis River and then the money floated to the Columbia River. Okay, maybe he lost the money during the jump. End of story. But it seems like it's the exact opposite, because the Tena Bar location is downstream, and the money doesn't just float upstream against the current by itself, right? And according to Ryan Burns, when they did the experiments on the D.B. Cooper Sleuth channel, it's that bundles of bills that size don't even float. They would actually sink to the bottom. So how on earth did this money get to Tena Bar? Why did this money end up at Tena Bar? Well, there is the theory that this was manually planted, that these three bundles of bills were manually planted there. And I told you guys, I'm going to walk you through my thought process. When I first heard this, I thought this was ridiculous. I thought there's no way that this money was manually planted. This is just people inserting person X into a situation to make it work. It's almost as if, well, let's just insert this imaginary person into the scenario to make the situation work. I thought there must have been some way that the money was moved there by natural means or even by technological means. I mean, we talked about dredging, for example. This is my thought process, that I just thought people were just making very, very bizarre leaps in their thought processes. But over time, that actually seemed like a much, much more viable option, because number one, I've always said that the money didn't fall from the sky and just land at Tena Bar, because three bundles would not fall at the exact same place if they were separated in some way. I think the only way that would work is if they were all secured together, but that would just count as one bundle, not three bundles of the $20 bills. And the second one is that the dredging option makes less and less sense, because the rubber bands on the bills were still intact, and they would most likely have been broken during the dredging of the river in 1974. And as far as some type of natural means, well, let's look at some of the alternatives. And when I was listening to the D.B. Cooper Sleuth channel, they brought up the propeller theory once again. And I discussed this in the very first episode of Cooper Friday here on Black Box Online Radio, when I was talking about the theory that D.B. Cooper dies during the jump. He lands in the water, and he's dead, and his parachute is still open. And then he gets tangled up in the propeller of a boat or some type of freighter, but any type of boat with a propeller, and that starts pulling the parachute as well as the bag that has the money in it upstream going against the current on the Columbia River, and then 3 bundles fell out of the bag that way back in 1971. Now, this is a very, very crazy theory because, I mean, it's based on the assumption that nobody came forward with any information. Nobody came forward with any specific plan to just say, oh yeah, I had a propeller, I had a parachute caught up in my propeller in 1971. Based on the amount of exposure in the D.B. Cooper case, I don't necessarily think that that's a very good explanation. Based on how popular this story is, no one came forward even 2 weeks later and said, yeah, I had a parachute tied up in my propeller on the Columbia River. Let alone, where's D.B. Cooper's body? Where's the rest of the money? You would think that if that happened, that some way, somehow, there would just be more physical evidence. So let's look at some other possibilities. And also, I really want to know what you guys think. So at the end of the episode, please share what you think about the Tena Bar money find. Now, the next point is going to relate to something that I think is very interesting. I don't know if I can confirm or deny it, but one point is that D.B. Cooper flies from Seattle in a southbound direction. They are heading toward Reno, Nevada, and as Darren Schaefer said very clearly during his Bright Brains interview, at some point between Seattle and Reno, D.B. Cooper jumps. Now, this is highly debated and is highly discussed. I personally think that he jumped over southern Washington, but what's more interesting is that the flight path was documented. It's called Victor 23. They're flying a very specific route. Now, did the pilots deviate from that route going in a different direction because of D.B. Cooper's skyjacking, because of the situation that was at hand? And did D.B. Cooper land at Tena Bar? This is something that's been widely discussed. I brought it up before. Even back when I did the Anything Goes Friday segment, I was discussing this theory about how D.B. Cooper lands at Tena Bar, and he either planted the bills there to mark the scene, or perhaps he came back years later and planted the $5,800 to mark the scene. This would be all based on him getting away successfully. You can evaluate that if you want. I'm really not sure what to make of that one because, number one, that could be completely possible. Maybe that's actually what happened. Number two, do we actually have evidence to support that? And I will also give you guys another possibility. And I'm not even going to lie to you. This is one of the real reasons why I wanted to do this segment for the D.B. Cooper episode this week. When I was watching the D.B. Cooper Sleuth channel with Ryan Burns, somebody brought this up in the chat because it was a live stream, and they said, was D.B. Cooper ever alone with Tina Mucklow's purse on the plane? Tina Mucklow was, of course, the flight attendant that spent the most time with D.B. Cooper. He gives the flight attendant Florence Schaffner the note that says, I have a bomb, but he actually spends the most amount of time with Tina Mucklow. And one thing that always seemed so strange to me was that Florence Schaffner is the one that saw D.B. Cooper without the sunglasses. Tina Mucklow spent more time with him, but she never saw him take off his sunglasses. I mean, I'm going to deviate from that point. I digress. But the point is that Tina Mucklow, Tena Bar, and that's definitely a nominal and linguistic connection. A lot of people bring that up. But D.B. Cooper offers Tina Mucklow some money from the ransom that he has obtained, the $200,000. And the way this was described on D.B. Cooper's Sleuth was that Cooper's face just lit up, more or less. Even though he has those dark black wraparound sunglasses on, he just seemed to start glowing when he saw the $200,000. And this is, again, my understanding of the events, is that Tina Mucklow, the flight attendant, asked D.B. Cooper if she can have some of the money. So then he reaches into the ransom bag, and he offers her some money, and then she says no, she cannot accept gratuities. So I think that she was kind of saying it as a joke, more or less. And Pat Bolin brought this up in one of the D.B. Cooper groups. Would you have accepted the money if D.B. Cooper offered it to you, if you were in Tina Mucklow's position? And my response was, no, I would not. Would I have wanted it? Yes. Would I have thought about it? Yes. But ultimately, I would not have accepted it because of consequences and backlash. However, what was discussed on the D.B. Cooper Sleuth channel was D.B. Cooper ever alone with Tina Mucklow's purse? Did she walk away, and that did he have time to put $5,800 in her purse? Because when you hear that number, 5,800, and you're talking about bank bills, banks often count their money a little bit more evenly than that. Shouldn't that have come out to $6,000? Just look at this scenario for a second and tell me why it's wrong. DB Cooper offers Tina Mucklow $200. He's just pulling some $20 bills out of the bands, and then here's $200 for like the gratuity, the tip, whatever we want to call that, he gave her, and she says no. So that would leave $5,800. Tina Mucklow walks toward the cockpit, and then DB Cooper grabs her purse and then puts $5,800 in there as a surprise. And then I really would be she at this point. Tina, finds the $5,800 in her purse, and then she's thinking, oh no, I don't want to spend this. I can't do this. I'm going to get in trouble. So she holds on to it for a number of years, maybe even a little bit of time passes by, and then she just is thinking, what on earth do I do with this? Well, I'm just going to bury this at Tena Bar because of the namesake. Did Tina Mucklow bury the money there herself? That's just something that was discussed on the DB Cooper Sleuth channel. And the only thing I think that would also corroborate or support this is that Tina Mucklow was reportedly living 10 miles away from the Tena Bar site in Oregon at the time. And again, I heard that on Bruce Smith's episode on the DB Cooper Sleuth channel. No, that was on his episode on his own personal YouTube channel, and it's called The Money Find at Tena Bar. It's a very, very good presentation from Bruce Smith. Now, there's something else that I want to talk about, and as many of you know, DB Cooper has been mentioned in the news very frequently these days because of an individual named Dan Greider, who runs the YouTube channel Probable Cause. And Dan Greider has claimed that he has found DB Cooper's parachute. And DB Cooper is a case that he has more or less claimed to have solved. He claims that DB Cooper was somebody named Richard Floyd McCoy. And there is a video that Dan Greider. Yes, what a wonderful name to be a DB Cooper sleuth. Dan. I wish that were my name right now. But yes, Dan Greider did a video where he was simulating the DB Cooper jump. And he jumps out of a plane with the exact weight of $200,000 in $20 bills. Of course, he's not using real money, but he simulated a bag that would have had $200,000 in cash. And he wasn't able to hold on to it, and it just flew away. And this is something that I wanted to bring up. Because again, this is from Ryan Burns. What was the point of that video? You were thinking it, I was thinking it. What's the point of that reenactment? What's the point of that simulation? What is the entire reason to do that? Because as I was watching Dan Greider jump out of the plane with his $200,000 fake money bag, yeah, it flies away. He's unable to hold on to it. But I'm just thinking, that's just based on the assumption that DB Cooper was manually holding the money. Who's to say that DB Cooper was manually holding the money? How on earth would Dan Greider know that? Even if somebody pulls out like a piece of fishing line and ties the money to themselves, that wouldn't be manually holding it without restraints or some type of securing measure. Even if he took off his shoelace and tied it to the harness, that would be some attempt to secure the money. And I'm not saying those happened. Those are extreme examples. I don't think that those things would have worked. It's just that, where is he getting this idea that DB Cooper had to have been holding the money with his bare hands and then it flew away? And I just don't think that there's any evidence to support that. But as far as Dan Greider's theory, he's of course going to say that DB Cooper was Richard Floyd McCoy and that he lost the money during the jump. So then Richard McCoy would go on to plan a different jump later on, where he's not asking for $200,000, he's asking for $500,000, more than twice the amount of the money that DB Cooper had obtained. And what's so odd about the McCoy skyjacking was, I'm going to go back to Darren Schaefer on the Bright Brains podcast when he listed off all the differences. And it was that McCoy corrected some things, or he was aware of some things following the Cooper skyjacking that seemed like he had a very high amount of awareness. And one thing they did when McCoy skyjacked his plane was that they put tracking devices in the parachutes, but McCoy didn't need that because he brought his own parachute. That's some very thoughtful points. I mean, and McCoy was a criminology student at Brigham Young University, so he definitely would have been familiar with a lot of criminological thought patterns. But the things that McCoy did that were absolutely horrible were that he wore a ridiculous disguise. He was wearing bronze tanning solution, and he was wearing just some type of fake facial hair or something like that. Whereas D.B. Cooper showed that all he needed for a disguise was a pair of wraparound sunglasses. He is the poor man's Clark Kent. But as far as McCoy, he has just seemed like a mess. He locks himself in the bathroom when he's putting on this disguise. He needs help from someone to get out of the bathroom. So in some ways, McCoy is a little bit smart, and in other ways, he is just an absolute nervous wreck. And this is one of the things. It's a strike against McCoy being D.B. Cooper. It's one of the things that I've always discussed. From the absolute first time that I learned the name Richard Floyd McCoy, I was like, somebody should not commit the first skyjacking and be cool, calm, and collected, and commit the second skyjacking and be nervous and a bumbling mess. You know, it's especially if he knew that he could have made the jump and, done everything successfully except holding on to the money. He should have known that he could get away with it. So what's the point of being this giant bumbling mess? It's like, oh, I did everything right the first time. All I have to do is secure the money in a better way next time. You would not just be sweating to the point where your bronze tanning solution is just starting to drip off of you. And McCoy was also reportedly just eating candy on the plane as a way to just calm his nerves. And D.B. Cooper was not doing any of that. He was drinking one bourbon and soda and smoking 7 Raleigh filter tip cigarettes. And it doesn't even seem like that's primarily done for nervousness. And I don't mean to go off on some giant tangent about D.B. Cooper's cigarettes, but I think that there is evidence to say that D.B. Cooper was a regular smoker if he smoked 7 cigarettes. I do not think that he was a chain smoker, and I'm not completely convinced that he was smoking because of nervousness. Instead, he may have smoked because he was an occasional smoker, and it was just something to do while he was sitting in the seat for all those hours. But as far as the money find at Tena Bar goes, Dan Greider created this whole theory that, okay, D.B. Cooper lost the money and it was just blown away because he was trying to hold on to it with his hands. I don't think there's any evidence to support that one as well. But so far, out of all the scenarios that you've heard, is there one that stands out to you the most? I mean, I guess one that I haven't talked about yet is perhaps one of the most widely discussed theories, and that is that D.B. Cooper survived the jump. D.B. Cooper was able to get off the plane. He lands successfully. He lands with the money, and he holds on to the money. And D.B. Cooper is the one who buried it at Tena Bar, paying homage to Tina Mucklow. And I don't know if that's the most widely discussed one that I've heard online, but it's definitely up there. That's definitely one of the top 3 theories that happened because D.B. Cooper was enamored with Tina Mucklow to a certain extent, or just he knew about Tena Bar, he knew about the name, and it just reminded him of Tina Mucklow that he did that. Another theory that I've heard discussed, and I think this was from Chris Cunningham, was that D.B. Cooper jumps out of the plane and he dies. He does not survive the jump. And somebody finds the $200,000. And then they're like, oh my goodness, we know what this is. This is the money from D.B. Cooper's heist. But they don't want to spend it. They want to hold on to it for years and years because they're waiting for people to stop looking for it. And then they buried $5,800 at Tena Bar to make it look like D.B. Cooper died, and then they threw off the investigation. Oh, he must have died and lost the money, and the money will never be found. And that Joe Schmo in the backwoods actually found the money and then spent it. And it's just this whole thing about the money not ending up in circulation again is an absolute myth. Okay, that's one. And I have a lot of mixed feelings about that because I'm so divided on this concept of the money never showing up in circulation again. So part of me wants to be like, well, that means that the money was never spent. The other part of me thinks that, yeah, they perhaps were not being very honest about thoroughly looking for any money at all. even if it were spent abroad. Maybe they just didn't have any true way to document these $20 bills other than going through the serial numbers manually and comparing them. Oh, somebody just deposited $20 at the bank. Let's check them to see if this is one of D.B. Cooper's bills. Were people actually doing that? I don't think so, but to think that that never happened at all in 9 years before the Tena Bar money find. Okay, now this is something else that one of you guys brought up on the most recent Cooper Friday episode. And again, shout out to you guys in the chat. I couldn't do this show without you. And it was that, what if DB Cooper landed in a very marshy or swampy patch, and that, he's unable to open the parachute, and that he jumps, he can't pull the ripcord, and he just cratered in some type of marshy and swampy area. When I was first reading off this comment, I was like, I wasn't really quite sure where the person was going with this, but then I began to think about it a little bit more. If you were to drop a rock from a high altitude into marshy or swampy soil or terrain, it's going to go into the ground, and then the soil or the marshy terrain is slowly going to encapsulate and enclose around the rock. So the same thing could have happened with Cooper. He could have cratered in some place where they couldn't find him, and then very quickly, the elements just covered him. All right, that makes perfect sense. DB Cooper died during the jump. He didn't get the parachute open, and that everything is just there. All right, well, how did the money get to Tena Bar? Would that be natural elements? I mean, diatoms from the Lewis River, springtime diatoms. I mean, I completely understand what they're doing with that propeller theory. I completely get it about how, okay, he jumped, he landed in the Lewis River, he died during the jump, and then some boat pulled him from the Lewis River to the Columbia River, and then maybe they didn't know it was a parachute, it was just the paracord that was tangled, so they just cut that off and said, oh yeah, something snagged on my propeller, and then D.B. Cooper just sank down, and then his body was pushed around in the currents, and the $5,800 ended up at Tena Bar. That's just looking at known facts. Money find at Tena Bar. D.B. Cooper was never seen again. And it's connecting the dots in a way which theorizing does. I mean, when people make theoretical statements and hypothetical statements, they are not saying that they have all the facts. They are saying that this is a possible interpretation of the evidence. Yeah, I completely get that. I still think that this propeller theory is making a bunch of assumptions. And maybe some way, somehow, if there's some type of way we can explore this Marshy crater theory, if that's what we're going to call it, that's also something that I think is worthy of consideration. But out of all of the theories that you've heard in this episode, which one makes the most sense to you? Do you think that Dan Grider was right and D.B. Cooper lost the money and that some of it just ended up at Tena Bar? Do you think that D.B. Cooper survived the jump and he manually planted the money there? Well, I've gone through two scenarios. One could be that that was the drop zone, and he marked the drop zone. Another one was that he was paying homage to Tina Mucklow years later. What do you think about the theory that Tina Mucklow found the $5,800 in her purse, and then she planted it because she wanted nothing to do with it? And I would really love to know what you guys think about that. And the reason why I said $5,800, think about this. D.B. Cooper pulls out $200 from the bundles, and that's in $20 bills. And then Tina Mucklow says no, so D.B. Cooper puts the $200, which should have been $10 $20 bills, not a lot of money, into his pocket as opposed to the money bag. And that's why there's $5,800 that was left behind. And he took the $5,800, put it in Tina's purse. What do you think about that? Or is there a completely different scenario? You can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My Facebook name is Ned DeHaan. And I also have a Facebook page for Black Box Online Radio. And there was always Black Box Ned 88 over on Instagram. And I will see you guys on Monday talking about the Zodiac Killer. Until next time.